Welcome to channel, don't forget to subscribe. Imagine, if you will, the golden hour in Seoul, South Korea on June 29, 1995. The air is thick with the humid heat of a midsummer afternoon, and the streets of the affluent Seoul district are pulsing with the energy of a nation on the rise. At the heart of this district stands a monument to South Korean prosperity, the Sampoong department store. To the casual observer, it is a pink palace, a shimmering five-story cathedral of consumerism clad in Italian marble and polished glass. Inside, nearly 1,500 people are navigating the cooling draft of the air conditioning, browsing luxury handbags, and dining in the upscale restaurants on the top floor. Life is vibrant, loud, and seemingly permanent. Then, at exactly 5:52 p.m., the unthinkable happens. In a span of just 20 seconds, the entire south wing of the building, 5 stories of reinforced concrete and steel, collapses vertically into the basement. It is not a slow lean or a partial crumble, it is a total catastrophic pancake collapse that leaves 502 people dead and over 900 injured, buried under thousands of tons of debris. The silence that follows the roar of the falling building is perhaps the most terrifying sound in the history of modern engineering. But here is the most chilling part of the story, the revelation that will haunt you for the rest of this video. The building didn't just fail because of a freak accident or a hidden flaw. It was screaming for help for hours before the first column snapped. While the executives were holding emergency meetings in the boardroom, they were listening to the sound of their own building tearing itself apart, and yet they kept the doors open to maximize the day's profits. In the middle of this video, we are going to dive into the exact moment the owners realized the building was doomed and why they chose to save themselves while leaving thousands of shoppers to their fate. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a cold-blooded calculation where human life was weighed against the price of a luxury watch and the life lost. To understand how a building of this magnitude could simply vanish in 20 seconds, we have to look at the sheer scale of the Sampoong department store. This wasn't a small boutique, it was a mega project of the 1990s. The store was a massive complex consisting of 2 identical wings connected by a central atrium, covering a total floor area of nearly 900,000 square feet. To give you a relatable comparison, that is the equivalent of 15 professional football fields stacked on top of one another. Every single day, upwards of 40,000 people passed through its doors. It was the centerpiece of a $120 million development, roughly $240 million in today's money, designed to be the most prestigious shopping destination in Asia. It was a symbol of the miracle on the Han River, the rapid economic growth that had transformed South Korea from a war-torn wasteland into a global powerhouse in just a few decades. The engineering specs of the building were, on paper, a testament to modern industrial might. It was constructed using a flat slab design, which meant there were no crossbeams between the columns. Instead, the concrete floors rested directly on the support pillars. This design is popular because it allows for higher ceilings and a more open, airy feel, perfect for a luxury department store. The columns were meant to be 31 inches thick, reinforced with a dense cage of steel rebar to handle the immense pressure of the 5 levels above. The roof alone was a massive slab of concrete designed to support the building's heavy industrial equipment. When the building was completed in 1989, it passed every inspection. It was certified as safe. It was legal. It was touted as a marvel of construction efficiency. Yet, beneath the Italian marble and the bright neon lights, the Sampoong department store was a ticking time bomb. The sheer weight of the structure was staggering. We are talking about nearly 80,000 tons of concrete. Imagine the weight of 2 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers stacked on a single city block, all held up by pillars that were secretly being thinned out to save a few dollars on construction costs. The most disturbing aspect of this disaster is that it shattered the fundamental assumption we all make when we walk into a modern building, that the walls around us are solid and the floors beneath us are secure. We assume that because a building is open for business, it has been vetted by experts who prioritize our lives over their margins. The Sampoong department store was the ultimate betrayal of that trust. It was a structure that had been inspected multiple times by city officials, awarded architectural accolades, and visited by the nation's elite. It was a place of beauty and prestige. And yet, as we will see in the next part of our journey, every single level of that beauty was built on a foundation of lies, corruption, and a total disregard for the laws of physics. We are about to look at the mechanics of this catastrophe, the moment-by-moment decisions that turned a palace of shopping into a tomb of concrete. Stay tuned, because the engineering shortcuts we are about to uncover are as shocking as they are unforgivable. To understand why the Sampoong department store fell, we have to look past the marble and into the dark heart of 1980s corporate greed. This catastrophe wasn't a mistake, it was a series of deliberate, lethal choices. The project began in 1987 as a residential apartment complex. However, mid-construction, the owner of the Sampoong group, Lee Jun, demanded a radical pivot. He wanted to turn this massive residential block into a high-end luxury department store. When the original contractors, Wusum Construction, looked at the revised blueprints and realized that removing support columns to install escalators would compromise the structural integrity, they refused to proceed. Instead of listening to the experts, Lee Jun fired them and used his own company's construction division to finish the job. This was the first domino to fall. The fundamental engineering flaw lay in the choice of a flat slab construction system. In a traditional beam and slab system, the weight of the floor is transferred to horizontal beams, which then distribute the load to the vertical columns. This creates a redundant safety net. But the Sampoong store used no beams. The concrete floor slabs rested directly on the columns. Think of it like a heavy book resting on the tips of 4 pencils. In this setup, the most critical factor is punching shear strength. If the load becomes too heavy or the column too thin, the floor won't just crack. It will behave like a piece of paper being pierced by a hole puncher, sliding down the column in a sudden vertical failure. To maximize floor space for more product displays, Lee Jun ordered the diameter of the support columns to be reduced from 31 inches to 23 inches. While 8 inches might not sound like much, in the world of physics, this drastically reduced the load capacity of each pillar. It's the difference between a sturdy tree trunk and a sapling trying to hold up a house. Furthermore, the steel rebar, the skeleton of the concrete, was placed 10 centimeters below the surface instead of the required 5 centimeters. This seemingly minor change effectively halved the slab's yield strength. The structural integrity was being eroded before the first customer even walked through the door. Then came the addition of the 5th floor. Originally designed as a roller rink, Lee Jun changed his mind again and decided it should house 8 traditional Korean restaurants. This was a death sentence for the building. Traditional Korean dining involves ondol, a floor heating system where hot water pipes are embedded in a thick layer of concrete. This added a massive amount of dead load to the top of the structure. We are talking about an extra 3,000 tons of weight, the equivalent of 500 fully grown African elephants standing on a roof that was never designed to hold them. The safety factor of the building, which should have been at least 2.0, was now hovering dangerously close to 1.0. The building was using every ounce of its theoretical strength just to stay standing. The final catalyst was the air conditioning system. 3 massive cooling units, weighing a combined 45 tons, were installed on the roof. When neighbors complained about the noise, the management decided to move them. Instead of using a crane, which would have been the standard safe procedure, they used rollers and dragged these 15-ton machines across the roof. This caused immense structural trauma, creating deep cracks of inclination in the roof slab. Every time the AC was turned on, the heavy fans created a rhythmic vibration. This was the metal fatigue of the building's soul. These vibrations acted like a slow-motion jackhammer, widening the cracks around column 5E, the primary support for the south wing. By early 1995, the building was literally groaning under the pressure. Staff reported hearing loud pops from the ceiling. These weren't just noises, they were the sounds of steel rebar snapping under tension. By the morning of June 29th, the situation turned critical. The roof around column 5E had sunk by 4 inches. An emergency meeting was held at 9 a.m. Civil engineers were called in, and their verdict was terrifying. The building was at risk of immediate collapse. They recommended an instant evacuation, but the management looked at the projected sales for that Thursday, thousands of dollars, and decided to wait. They chose to close the 5th floor and turn off the air conditioning to reduce the vibrations, but they left the rest of the store open. As the temperature rose and the heavy humid air settled in, the stress on the weakened concrete reached the point of no return. The angle of inclination of the support pillars was shifting. The physics were no longer in doubt. The only question was the exact second the punching shear would finally give way. By 5 p.m. on June 29th, the situation inside the Pink Palace had transitioned from a structural concern to a horror movie. The fifth floor was a wasteland of warped tiles and widening chasms. On the lower floors, however, thousands were still shopping, unaware that the ceiling above them was being held up by little more than hope. At 5:40 p.m., the sound of the building's agony became impossible to ignore. Witnesses described a series of deafening cracks that sounded like a barrage of shotgun blasts echoing through the atrium. These were the main support columns literally exploding under the compressive stress. Even then, the management hesitated. It wasn't until 5:50 p.m., just 2 minutes before the end, that an alarm was finally raised. But it wasn't a coordinated evacuation, it was a panicked scramble. At exactly 5:52 p.m., the physics of neglect reached its breaking point. Column 5E, burdened by the weight of the massive cooling towers and the thick restaurant floors, finally suffered a total punching shear failure. The roof slab didn't just break, it became a guillotine. As the roof fell onto the fifth floor, the added kinetic energy was more than the already weakened pillars could handle. This triggered a classic pancake collapse. One floor smashed into the next, which smashed into the next, gathering momentum like a falling hammer. In just 20 seconds, the entire south wing, 5 stories of luxury and thousands of tons of concrete fell vertically into the basement. To visualize the speed, the building fell at a rate of nearly 1 floor per second. If you were standing in the middle of the store, you wouldn't have had time to reach the nearest exit before the ceiling met the floor. The immediate aftermath was a scene of apocalyptic desolation. A massive plume of white dust, pulverized concrete and asbestos billowed out of the Seoul district, visible for miles. Where a vibrant shopping center had stood, there was now only a jagged, V-shaped crater filled with twisted metal and marble. The silence that followed was broken only by the screams of the trapped. The scale of the human tragedy was staggering. 502 people were killed instantly or died while waiting for help. Over 900 were injured. Among the victims were young clerks like 18-year-old Lee Sung-yong and shoppers like 30-year-old Kim Ju-yeon, who had gone in just to buy a gift. Their stories were cut short in a heartbeat by a failure of ethics as much as a failure of engineering. But amid the darkness, there were miracles that gripped the world's attention. Rescue workers defied the risk of a secondary collapse of the north wing, dug through the rubble for weeks. The most incredible story was that of Park Sung-hyun, a 19-year-old store clerk who was rescued after being buried for 17 days. She had survived in a tiny pocket of air, drinking rainwater that seeped through the debris. Her survival became a symbol of national hope, but it also highlighted the agonizing reality of the hundreds of others who didn't make it. As the dust settled, the anger of the South Korean public turned toward the investigation. What the forensic engineers found was a catalogue of criminal negligence. When they tested the concrete from the site, they found it had a compressive strength of less than half of what was required by law. It was honeycombed, filled with air pockets because it hadn't been poured correctly. They found that the rebar wasn't just misplaced, in many crucial joints it was missing entirely. This building didn't fall because of a natural disaster, it fell because it was built like a sandcastle. The investigation quickly moved from the rubble to the boardroom. Investigators uncovered a massive web of bribery and corruption. It turned out that Lee Jun, the chairman of Sampoong Group, had paid off city officials to approve his illegal design changes. These officials accepted envelopes of cash to look the other way while a death trap was constructed in the middle of Seoul. During the trial, Lee Jun showed no remorse, famously stating that the collapse of the building is as much of a loss to the company as to the customers. This statement ignited a firestorm of fury. In the end, Lee Jun was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, a sentence many felt was a pittance compared to the 502 lives lost. The city officials involved were also jailed, but the scars on the Korean psyche were permanent. The Pink Palace was gone, replaced by a deep national wound that demanded a total reimagining of how the country built its future. The dust from the collapse of the Sampoong department store didn't just settle on the streets of Seoul, it settled on the conscience of an entire nation. In the weeks that followed, the South Korean government was forced to confront a terrifying reality. The miracle on the Han River was built on a foundation of sand. To restore public trust, the authorities launched a massive, unprecedented audit of every high-rise building in the country. The results were a shock to the global engineering community. Of the thousands of structures inspected, a staggering 98% failed to meet basic safety standards. Only 2%, 1 in every 50 buildings, were deemed fully safe and built according to code. 81% of the nation's skyscrapers required major structural overhauls, and 7% were so dangerous they had to be demolished immediately. Imagine walking through a modern city and knowing that almost every ceiling above you is a structural gamble. That was the reality for South Koreans in 1995. This revelation led to the immediate passage of the Special Act on Safety Control for Public Structures. This wasn't just another piece of bureaucratic paper. It was a total overhaul of the nation's building DNA. It mandated the creation of the Korea Infrastructure Safety and Technology Corporation, or KISTEC. For the first time, structural integrity was no longer a suggestion or a negotiable line item in a budget. It became a matter of national security. Rigorous independent inspections became mandatory every few years, with zero tolerance for the kind of design pivots that Lee Jun had forced upon his architects. The law ensured that if a contractor tried to thin out a column to save a few dollars, they wouldn't just face a fine, they would face the full weight of the criminal justice system. To understand the systemic nature of this failure, we can look at the Swiss cheese model of accident causation. In engineering, every safety measure, the inspections, the rebar, the load-bearing beams, is like a slice of Swiss cheese. Each has holes, but when they are stacked together, the holes usually don't align. In the case of Sampoong, every single hole aligned perfectly. The grit of the owner, the silence of the engineers, the corruption of the city officials, and the lack of redundant beams all lined up to create a direct path for catastrophe. This wasn't a freak accident, it was a normal accident, a term used by sociologists to describe a disaster that is virtually built into the complexity of a system when safety is sidelined for speed. The tragedy of Sampoong mirrors other legendary engineering failures, such as the 1981 Hyatt Regency walkway collapse in Kansas City. In that case, a seemingly minor change in how the rods were connected doubled the load on a single nut, leading to 114 deaths. The lesson is the same. In the world of physics, there is no such thing as a small change. A missing 5 centimeters of rebar or a narrowed column isn't a cost-saving measure, it is a death warrant. The physics of gravity do not care about your quarterly profit margins or your grand opening dates. Gravity is a constant, and it is a judge that never misses a trial. Today, if you visit the site of the former Pink Palace in the Seoul district, you won't find a blackened crater or a traditional monument. Instead, you will see the Acro Vista Apartments, a sleek, ultra-luxury residential complex. There is a profound, almost haunting irony in the fact that a site where 502 people died because of luxury-driven greed is now home to the city's elite once again. While a small memorial stands in the nearby Yangjae Citizens Forest, the site itself has been reclaimed by the very consumerism that destroyed it. This serves as a powerful metaphor for the modern world. We are often so eager to build over our failures that we risk forgetting the lessons they taught us. The Sampoong department store collapse is not just a story of concrete and steel, it is a mirror of systemic decisions. It reminds us that every structure we inhabit is a silent contract between the builder and the public, a contract of trust. When we allow corruption to seep into the mortar of our buildings, we are effectively trading human lives for temporary growth. As we push the boundaries of what is possible with mega projects and skyscrapers, we must remember that the most important material in any building isn't the concrete or the glass, it's the integrity of the people